Hi and welcome back to Terry Talks Movies. This time around I'm doing two films from the 60s and the 1930s. Both of them are kind of speculative fiction, each in their own way. And both of them have thematic similarities, which I'm going to talk about at the end of the video because I want to kind of tie it up in my mind why these films have something similar about them. The first one is Lost Horizon from 1937. Directed by Frank Capra, made by Columbia Pictures. It's based on the novel by James Hilton, which I recommend you read. It's quite a fun novel to read. And it's got that post-World War I idealism, where people were hoping that there wouldn't be another global war. Unfortunately, as we know, there was. But that idealism between the wars is something palpable, kind of interesting, and also I think it's something that has a virtue that we should retain in our modern day, but we too often don't. The cast in this one I like a lot. It's got Ronald Colman playing Robert Conway, the new British Foreign Secretary who's on his way back from China, where he's assisted in rescuing 90 Westerners from a city in the west of China, which has been invaded by rebels of some kind. The politics are kind of vague in this. Conway gets out on the last plane, and he's kind of melancholy. He knows that he's rescued 90 white people, and it's explicitly said in the movie, white people, from Bascul, the city. But his thoughts are with the thousands of local people that got left behind for the revolutionaries to probably slaughter. So he's got a very complex worldview for a 1930s privileged Englishman. On the plane, it was also his brother, played by John Howard. There's also a paleontologist played by Edward Everett Horton, who's kind of the comic relief in the movie, but gets a couple of kind of serious notes in there. There's a man called Barnard, played by Thomas Mitchell, who is an engineer turned embezzler, who made a lot of people lose a lot of money and who's hiding by running away overseas. A woman called Gloria, who is fatally ill. And of course there's the pilot. The plane crashes somewhere near Tibet, and the people who survive are rescued by a group of Sherpas from a place called Shangri-la, which is a kind of utopian valley high in the Himalayas, which has a mild climate because the mountains protect it from the cold and the winds.
Welcome to Shangri-La. You see, we are sheltered by mountains on every side. A strange phenomenon for which we are very grateful. Magical.
Shangri-La, a place in a valley called the Valley of the Blue Moon, which is protected from the Himalayan cold by the mountains around it, has a very mild climate and a very kind of pleasant culture where everything is in moderation, including moderation. The survivors are introduced into life in Shangri-La by a guy called Chang, played by H.B. Warner, who doesn't really do yellowface in this one. He's more kind of a Eurasian character. His ethnicity is a little bit vague, and his accent isn't fake Chinese, which is fortunate. Gently ruling the valley is someone called the High Lama, played by Sam Jaffe, who has quite an interesting backstory. And as the survivors get settled into Shangri-La, a few interesting things happen. First off, Conway finds himself seduced and really integrated into the world of Shangri-La. The idealism and the utopianism of the place is attractive to him. He meets a young woman called Sondra, played by Jane White, who grew up in the valley, and he starts a kind of tentative relationship with her. Meanwhile, George, his brother, played by John Howard, has a relationship with a woman called Maria, who was rescued and brought to the valley as well. She's played by an actress called Margot, who I only just found out later married Eddie Albert and stayed married to him for the rest of her life. So there's a connection between Green Acres and Lost Horizon in a weird way. Now, this sets up an interesting dynamic. Edward Everett Horton's character Lovey is kind of coded as gay because the actor himself was gay. And he and Barnard, played by Thomas Mitchell, have an interesting little not antagonistic, but friendly relationship, which is, is Barnard himself gay? Who knows?
I say good morning, Lovey.
Good morning, and look here, young man. I didn't care for sister last night, and I don't like Lovey this morning. My name is Lovett, Alexander P.
I see.
Yes.
But they do have quite a good rapport, and the chemistry between the actors works really well in this one. He's mocked a little bit by Barnard, but always in a gentle way. And I think that plays kind of nicely to a modern audience's sensibilities. Lovey finds his best self in Shangri-La by becoming a teacher to children and teaching them about biology and paleontology. And Barnard, who's an engineer, starts some irrigation projects that will help the people in the valley as well. So he finds his best self in there. And Conway meets the High Lama and finds out the High Lama's secrets, while his brother George wants to get out of the valley at any costs. He and Maria, the woman he starts a relationship with, are really passionate about getting out. They don't believe a word of what's told to them about Shangri-La. They're cynical and they just want to get back to what is broadly known as civilization, whereas Conway is reluctant to do so. Now, Conway's played by Ronald Colman in this, and Ronald Colman has a wonderful idealism about him as a character and a kind of depth of humanity that you find in several characters in Frank Capra films, but in this one I particularly like it. He's a diplomat, he's a writer, and he's also something of a philosopher. And he wants the world to be a better place, and he's constantly trying to find a way for the world to be a better place. He is given the opportunity to start that process with Shangri-La and introducing the world to the philosophy that makes this place a successful society. So there's really interesting stuff in this. There's some light comedy bits in it as well, but overall there's a real utopian idealism to this film that I like a lot. I think there are too few utopian movies and too many dystopian ones. Now, a couple of decades ago, UCLA Film School helped to restore this film, and there were some problems because they had the audio from a lot of the missing parts of it. The movie, like many movies of its time, had been butchered and cut together in smaller ways by the studios. And they had the audio from the original tracks, but not the visuals, so they used production stills and things like that in the restoration. We had 7 or 8 minutes of the movie, where what we're seeing is movie stills while the original audio plays in the background. And the first time I saw that, it took me out of the movie a little bit, but on rewatching it this time around, it didn't do that. The bits that were missing were character bits for some of the minor characters, including Gloria, the woman who, until she reaches Shangri-La, is dying of some kind of consumption or some kind of lung disease. It also gives us a bit more detail into Lovey and Barnard and their backstories as well. It fleshes out the characters and their decisions about how they're going to live and whether they want to leave Shangri-La or not. Makes it a little more of an interesting movie to have those in there. They could have just left out those bits because they didn't have the original footage, but I think fleshing out the minor characters is something that really works well in this case, because it gives us the way that this place and the kind of specialness of it is attractive to people who are weary and tired of the outside world. Now, the production design in this is fantastic. There's an Art Deco look to the buildings in Shangri-La, which really works. There's a whole bunch of younger, particularly non-white actors in the movie, which I like a lot. I think they are given, if not prominence, they're given respect as minor characters, and their intelligence and their integrity and their culture is given some respect in this one, which is not something you expect from a 1930s Hollywood film. The music by Dmitri Tiomkin is very good as well. The production did go to extreme lengths to convey its story. When the survivors are on the crashed plane, they filmed a lot of those scenes in a giant refrigerated warehouse, which works really well because you can see the steam coming out of people's mouths when they speak. And the actors are cold, so it looks like they're cold, which is a kind of long way to go for a movie of its time. The budget was $2 million, which was a big budget, particularly for Columbia Films at the time, but I think it's all there on the screen. And the evocation of this magical place of Shangri-La works really well too. There are lots of birds flying around. There are trees. There are blossoms. There are agricultural fields. There are beautiful interiors in the palaces and the clothing of the local people, which is very Chinese influenced. Yeah, this movie, I keep coming back to it. I mean, there was the 1973 remake, which was done by Ross Hunter as a musical with Hal David and Burt Bacharach writing the lyrics. That's the one with Peter Finch and Michael York, Olivia Hussey, George Kennedy, Liv Ullmann, and Bobby Van in it. And even though that's a kind of vulgar pleasure, and I've got the soundtrack album here in the vinyl soundtracks as well, I think that it's kind of a dog's breakfast of a movie. The songs, most of the songs don't work. There are one or two that do, but most of the songs don't work. And the acting is kind of off for the particular characters, except for maybe Peter Finch and a couple of others. But for the most part, the remake is better forgotten while you're watching this movie, because this one is something a bit special. And the quest that Robert Conway, the character, has to find a way to improve the world and find a way to be a better person himself is one that many, many of us can sympathise with. And for that reason, I like the film a lot. Now, that takes us to the second film, which is very different, but in a sense has thematic similarities to Lost Horizon. Director John Frankheimer's Seconds from 1966 is considered part of a trilogy of movies that he made. They're called the Paranoia Trilogy. The first one, of course, was The Manchurian Candidate. The second one was 7 Days in May, which is a really fine piece of work as well. And the third one is this adaptation of a novel by David Eli, which he made in 1966, starring Rock Hudson, Cilla Mae Jens, Will Geer and John Randolph, and it's science fiction sort of, but I'm rewatching it this time around, and here is the version that I watched, the Masters of Cinema Blu-ray, which has some extras in it and is a really nice transfer of the movie, restored from a 4K master, so the quality is definitely there, even though Frankenheimer does film a lot of it quite grainily, and there are reasons for that as well. John Randolph plays a guy called Arthur Hamilton, who's a middle-aged banking executive in New York City. He's professionally successful, but he's really unfulfilled in his life. His wife, Emily, and he are kind of companionate, but not really together very much in a psychological sense. His daughter's grown up and married, and Arthur's really living a life of quiet desperation. He's approached by a stranger who gives him an address, and he gets a phone call from a friend of his called Charlie, who is dead, or at least he thinks is dead. And Charlie encourages Arthur to go to this address and says that the company will save him from his empty life and give him a new life to live. Now, there are a couple of interesting things about the little bit of a kind of paper chase that Arthur goes on. At first, he's sent to a laundry, which is a place where things are renewed. And from the laundry, he is sent to a meat packing company, which again is kind of thematically important to this movie. And eventually, he ends up in an office. And he meets a couple of people. One is a man called Ruby, played by the wonderful Jeff Corey, who explains to him the financial aspects of what's proposed and how he's going to get a new life, gets him to sign the paperwork using a bit of psychological pressure, and the assistance of a character called the Old Man, played by Will Geer, who is the person who has created this company, which offers, and pretty much exclusively men, a chance to live a second life.
My name is Ruby. I've been assigned to go over the circumstances of your death with you. CPS has to provide a fresh corpse that perfectly matches your physical dimensions and medical specifications.
CPS?
Oh, cadaver procurement section.
They fake Arthur's death in a hotel fire. He goes through extensive changes, which include plastic surgery, kind of a fitness regime, and possibly other things, which make him a lot younger and turn him into a character called Tony Wilson, played by Rock Hudson. Tony is set up with a new life in Santa Barbara. He's an artist because Arthur originally had a hobby of painting, but that fell by the wayside as his professional career took up all of his spare time. And he is suddenly a good-looking younger man living in a very bohemian environment. On the beach, he meets a woman called Nora, played by Salome Jens, and starts a relationship with her, and she tries to take him out of his shell and tries to help him live a better life and to embrace the opportunities and the joie de vivre of his new life. She takes him to a very bacchanalian grape festival in Santa Barbara, which ends up being an orgy in a tank full of grapes. And he kind of embraces that, but he still can't be happy. There's some kind of psychological glitch in Arthur/Tony that doesn't let him live a fulfilled life. He sneaks away and revisits his ex-wife, who has very much moved on with her life and has some very salient things to say about her dead husband, Arthur. And Tony thinks he's finally got a grasp on what he needs to live a good life. But then when he returns to the company, things don't quite go to plan. And if you've seen the movie, you know the ending. But for me, the interesting thing is the character of Arthur/Tony. There's an old saying about an unexamined life isn't worth living, and right up until he becomes Tony and goes and visits his ex-wife again, the character doesn't really examine his own life. When he's asked questions in the initial briefing by the company, he's reluctant to answer them. He's reluctant to talk about his feelings and about personal matters with these people. And I can understand that because they're a bunch of bastards, but that reluctance to even examine his life and examine what's gone wrong with it, or even to not embrace the privilege he had in his original life, where he was quite well off. He had gone to Princeton, he was well connected, he had everything that would be needed for him to really live a good life. He had money, he had respect from his peers, amongst other things. But he couldn't step outside that grey flannel suit, which I find kind of interesting because the character is 50 years old. He's 15 years younger than me, which was a very different kind of age in the 1960s. But he was locked into being on that corporate treadmill, and therein lies the seeds of his own destruction. And when he gets the opportunity to live a much freer life, and a life where he can build something for himself, he can be creatively fulfilled, he can actually start the journey of finding his best self, he can't embrace that. He can't find fulfillment. Now, that then brings us to the company. The company I find really fascinating as well, because it's a real criticism of capitalism in a lot of ways in this movie. Because the company that offers these men a chance at a second life has a woeful success rate. It changes these men, it makes them younger, it gives them new opportunities and new lives to live, but it can't make them happy. Like the men themselves, this company is locked into its worldview. And the old man talks about this and how they're getting closer to perfecting their process of reviving these men. The thing they don't realise, and the thing that nobody in this movie realises, is you don't need to be younger to make your life better. You just need to examine it and to reject a lot of the bullshit that your culture has imposed upon you. And none of them do that. And so this monstrous company, which, when we see the waiting room and what that's like and the implications of that, it shows us that this is a business that chews up human beings in an incredibly literal way while selling a product which people don't really need. Now, this is a marvelously deep movie, and it's Rock Hudson's best role. Him as Tony Wilson is Rock Hudson playing a character who's pretending to be something they're not, which is a role with which Rock Hudson himself was intimately familiar, playing a straight man in so many movies when he was actually a closeted gay man. This is a role that cuts close to the bone of the actor, and I think it brings out his best. Rock Hudson played charming in a lot of movies and played tough in some movies. In Seconds, this is Rock Hudson's showing a certain vulnerability that really wasn't present in so many of his other movie roles. This is his best movie without any argument. The fact that he, as a gay actor, working for a gay director, gave his best work in a movie about a man pretending to be something he wasn't is really interesting. So what's the thematic continuity between Lost Horizon and Seconds? They're both about a man trying to find their best self. They're about men who go incredible distances to examine their own lives and to try to find their own lives and to try to find a place where they will be happy. The paths are very different, and the honesty of Conway, the Ronald Colman character, being able to step outside his own culture and examine his life and try to head in a direction that not only is going to help him, but is going to help many, many other people, is really interesting. Whereas Tony Wilson / Arthur Hamilton is a character who has a chronic disability to move in a new direction in a way that will make him happier. He feels guilty about leaving his own life, and yet he can't embrace a new one. He's so desperate to find an answer that he falls into the hands of predators. So they're both asking the same questions. How do I make my life better? How do I make things better? And they come up with two different answers based on the character of the characters and the guts with which the characters approach that particular question. And so even though they don't seem to be thematically similar, they really are. And watching them together, I realised that I was going to do a different movie along with Seconds, but I realised I'd already done it in a previous video. But I think Lost Horizon is the right one to double feature with Seconds for those thematic reasons. I enjoyed watching them a lot. Both of them are fantastic rewatches, even though the last 5 or 10 minutes of Seconds is a difficult watch. It really is harrowing, particularly if you know the ending. I think that it's scarier if you know the ending and you just watch the kind of machinations of the company in that last 10 minutes or so. It really is a terrifying movie, whereas the ending of Lost Horizon is inspirational. So that's it for this time around. Thank you very much for watching. As always, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of these two movies and whether you think they are a good match thematically for a double feature. You can also support the channel by donating at patreon.com/paleocinema. I've still got the giveaway for people who subscribe before the 1st of December to get a copy of the imprint box set of The World of Susie Wong. And of course, for the Patreon supporters as well, I'm also doing a Christmas reading of A Die Hard Christmas, which I am really looking forward to doing. Only the Patreon supporters will see that video, and I'm going to have fun reading that one and just sharing that little bit of alternative seasonal fun. So until the next video, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Try to find some very different movies that are linked up together and watch them back to back, because it really is an interesting thing to do. And I'll catch you next time.